It has now been 4 years since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan. 4 years since the world watched the fall of Kabul. So, what's the reality on the ground today? Well, let's dive into what is a very complex and, honestly, a deeply contradictory picture.
And really, everything about Afghanistan today boils down to this one question. Because, depending on where you look, you can find evidence for both sides of that coin. It's become a place where stability comes at a terrifyingly high price. And that's the central tension we're going to unpack here.
And this right here, this is that core paradox in a nutshell. On one side, reports do acknowledge that with the 20-year insurgency over, large-scale conflict has dropped, and with it, civilian casualties. But on the other side, you have this systematic, deliberate dismantling of basic human rights. These two things are happening at the exact same time, which makes understanding the situation so incredibly difficult. So let's start with that first claim, security. The Taliban's main justification for their role, the one they repeat over and over, is that they brought order to a country ripped apart by war. But what does that order actually look like, and what is its real human cost? You can't really argue at this point. For many Afghans, the end of widespread fighting brought a different kind of daily life. The constant fear of a major attack or just being caught in the crossfire, that has gone down significantly. For some, that's a genuine relief. But, and this is a huge but, that relief is fragile and it comes with some very heavy strings attached.
And this is the price. 583. That's how many people have been publicly flogged by the Taliban in 2024. I want to be clear, this isn't justice happening behind closed doors. This is a public spectacle. It happens in stadiums, in town squares, and it's all designed to do one thing: instill fear and enforce obedience. This is the other face of that order.
Now, what's so striking here is just how completely they've overhauled the system. They didn't just tweak the old one. They ripped it out root and stem. The Constitution? Gone. Replaced by their own strict, uncodified interpretation of Sharia law. Women, who were once prosecutors and judges, are now forbidden from even working in the legal field. It's a system built entirely on coercion, with zero transparency. And get this, even with all of that, the Taliban's grip on security isn't absolute. They have a major rival, ISKP. This group sees the Taliban as an enemy, and they launch these brutal attacks specifically to prove that the Taliban can't keep people safe. So while the big 20-year war is over, a different, and still very dangerous conflict is simmering. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the economy, because here we find another one of those paradoxes. An economy that's showing these tiny, fragile signs of life right in the middle of a catastrophic humanitarian crisis affecting millions. I mean, this chart tells such a dramatic story. You see that immediate freefall after the takeover, a nearly 30% collapse in the economy. That is just devastating. But then, look at 2024. You see this tiny little bit of growth. So the economy didn't totally disintegrate, it just stabilized at a much, much lower and much more desperate level. And if you ask the Taliban, they'll point to these numbers as major wins. Exports are up. They've cracked down on opium cultivation with, frankly, stunning effectiveness. It's down 95%. And they say they're collecting enough revenue to fund their own government budgets. On paper, these look like moves towards stability. But, and this is a huge but, this is the devastating reality sitting right next to those stats. The international aid that the people of Afghanistan depend on has absolutely cratered. For 2025, the humanitarian plan has an 83% shortfall. So while the Taliban government might be funding itself, the Afghan people are being left to face this crisis almost entirely alone. And this table just lays out the human toll in stark terms. We're talking about almost 23 million people. That's over half the population who need aid just to survive. Nearly 15 million are facing food insecurity. And look at that last line. The economic cost of just excluding women is estimated to be almost $1 billion. This isn't just a social policy, it's a self-inflicted economic disaster. And that brings us to what is, for many, the single defining feature of Taliban rule. This isn't just one issue among many. For the Taliban, this is central. It's the core of their entire ideology and their system of governance. The term that UN experts are now using is gender apartheid. And that's not a term you throw around lightly. It's used because this isn't just a few restrictive rules. It is a comprehensive, systematic, legal architecture of discrimination. There have been over 80 decrees designed for one purpose: to completely erase women from public life.
And you can see how the system is built, step by step. First, you ban them from education, cutting them off from their future. Then you ban them from most jobs, destroying their economic independence. Then you control their movement, taking away their physical freedom. And finally, you ban their participation and expression, silencing their voices. Each step locks them in further.
2.5 million. Let that number just sink in for a second. That is how many girls are being denied a secondary education right now. Afghanistan is the only country on planet Earth that bans girls from attending high school. It's a generational catastrophe happening in real time. You know, after all the data and the policy talk, sometimes a single sentence says it all. This quote is from an Afghan woman. "We feel like we are buried alive." That's not just about losing rights. It's about losing your hope, your identity, being erased from your own society while you're still living in it. So you would think a regime like this would be a total pariah, right? Completely isolated. And from the West, they mostly are. But the geopolitical map is shifting, and that creates one more paradox. A regime that's shunned by some is being actively engaged by others. You can see the story unfold right here on this timeline. In 2021, it was a wall of Western sanctions and frozen assets. But then, regional powers like China and Pakistan started what they call pragmatic engagement, focused on trade and security. And then the big one, in 2025, Russia became the first major power to formally recognize the Taliban government. That wall of isolation is definitely starting to crack. So what we have now are two totally different playbooks. The West is basically holding the line, using sanctions as leverage to push for human rights. But regional powers? They're prioritizing their own interests, stability on their borders, counterterrorism, and economic projects. And they're willing to deal with the Taliban as they are, right now, to get what they want. So, after looking at security, the economy, women's rights, and the diplomatic scene, what's the big picture? Well, the big picture is that the story of Afghanistan today is a story of deep, persistent, and painful contradictions. So to put it all together, yes, there's a kind of brutal stability, but it's enforced through public floggings and fear. Yes, there's a flicker of economic activity, but it's happening while millions face starvation. The oppression of women isn't just a side issue, it's a central policy that is also crippling the economy. And finally, while the West keeps its distance, regional powers are slowly but surely bringing the Taliban back in from the cold. And that leaves all of us with this fundamental and really difficult question. The Taliban has basically presented a choice to Afghanistan and to the world. You can have our brutal version of security, or you can have human rights, but you can't have both. For the future of 40 million Afghans, the biggest challenge is finding out if there's any path forward that doesn't force such an impossible choice.